All right, it's like 1 minute before, but people are quiet, so I'm just going to take advantage of that and we'll get started. Hi, my name is Shannon McGregor. I'm an associate professor here in the J School, and I want to thank you for joining us for First Amendment Day and specifically for this session on the administration of free speech. I want to say a thank you to TransparUNCy and to former Provost Chris Clemens for joining us today. I'm just going to give a brief introduction and then I'll turn it over to y'all and we'll get started. For those that might not know, TransparUNCy is a student organization that's dedicated to sharing educational resources to their fellow undergraduates and to help understand the politics of university governance. You may have heard about them or seen their teach-ins around campus. They're dedicated to sort of asking who really controls education, how they do it, and what they might not want us to know. So to kick off this session, I'm pleased to introduce one of TransparUNCy's co-founders, Toby Posel, an undergraduate here at UNC, and he'll take it from here. So go ahead.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thanks to everyone for being here. It's very nice to see everyone's face. We have a packed house today, so I'm sure it'll be a lively discussion. I'm going to introduce Dr. Clemens. Dr. Chris Clemens is the Yaroslav Folda Distinguished Professor of Physics and Astronomy here in Chapel Hill. He's a prolific scholar, researcher, and teacher who has been at UNC Chapel Hill for nearly 3 decades. And most recently, Dr. Clemens served as provost from 2021 until he stepped down in May of this year. And we're honored and grateful to have Dr. Clemens join us today. To give a little bit of a sense of how today's going to run, it's primarily going to be a moderated discussion between Dr. Clemens and myself, but we're hoping to have some time for Q&A as well. So I'm sure there's a lot on people's minds. There will be an opportunity for some questions. I want to give one disclaimer before we start. There's obviously been some news recently that people might have heard. Dr. Clemens has recently sued the Board of Trustees of Chapel Hill over disputes about violations of public records and open meetings law. While the lawsuit is, of course, an important matter for our campus community as an ongoing legal issue, Dr. Clemens will, of course, not be able to speak about the details of the case. So we ask that public questions at the end refrain from, specific questions about the legal issue. That being said, the lawsuit relates to a number of important themes about speech, transparency, and university governance that are essential for our community and the health of the university. So we'll certainly be touching on those. So again, yeah, thanks for everyone for being here. I want to start by saying we're living through an intensely authoritarian moment in higher education. The Trump administration has been cutting billions of dollars in research grants and using legal coercion to force universities to conform to its ideological agenda, often using the perceived threat of wokeness or of anti-Semitism as a pretense to fundamentally reshape the institutional landscape of higher ed. It's worth mentioning these attacks are coming directly from the top of the Trump administration, including Vice President J.D. Vance, who I'm sure many people in this room remember in 2021 said infamously that professors are the enemy. These attacks undoubtedly represent an unprecedented escalation at the federal level, but the roots of the right-wing war on higher education date back much further in our state of North Carolina. Since Republicans won majorities in the state legislature in 2010, they have used their control over bodies like the North Carolina Board of Governors and the Chapel Hill Board of Trustees to attack principles of faculty governance, academic freedom, to silence opposing political views and encourage violence against peaceful student protesters. Dr. Clemens, until your resignation last spring, you were widely seen as a crucial ally to this movement in North Carolina. It's been reported that you were only appointed to the provost position in the first place because of these political connections in Raleigh. But as we've seen in recent months, the political landscape in our state and at the federal level is changing rapidly. You're now an outsider looking in to the current administration. And now that you have some distance from your time in the Chapel Hill administration, I wanted to ask for your perspective on a number of particularly pressing and contentious issues in university governance and in free speech particularly. So I want to start by talking about a set of issues that was perhaps more on people's minds around a year ago, which is issues of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. In the spring of 2024, so last spring, the UNC Board of Governors passed its policy of institutional neutrality, which repealed DEI programs at every constituent institution in the UNC system. The policy change came after a wave of similar anti-DEI legislation in a number of states across the South and was part of a concerted effort by right-wing activists and organizations like the Claremont Institute and the Manhattan Institute to purge, again, wokeness from the university in and outside the classroom. Now, theoretically, the UNC institutional neutrality policy has carve-outs for research and for teaching, right? This policy is not supposed to affect free speech in the classroom and what faculty are able to pursue in their research. But this year, this academic year, there have been multiple reports of right-wing groups like the Oversight Project, which is an affiliate of the Heritage Foundation, the organization behind Project 2025, attempting to access syllabi to ensure that classroom instruction is complying with the DEI ban. Clearly, these right-wing groups with close financial and political affiliations to the North Carolina Republican Party, it's worth mentioning, have felt empowered by the DEI ban and are attempting to weaponize it beyond the specific language of the policy. Especially given the national political environment, it's clear how these legal threats can have a chilling effect on speech in and outside the classroom. So my question for you, Dr. Clemens, is what is the responsibility of current admin at UNC and sort of writ large across the country to ensure that these DEI bans do not threaten free speech on our campuses? And further, what does it mean to uphold a policy of institutional neutrality in the face of fundamentally asymmetric political and legal attacks from the right?
Yeah, thanks, Toby. I'm triple mic'd here, so I'm gonna push back on your intro before I answer your question a little bit. But first, let me thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for coming. There was a famous writer who was asked, "Do you like writing?" I can't remember who this was, and he said, "I like having written." So, do you like being provost? I like having been provost. I did not like being provost. I think you framed a sort of attack on higher ed as though it's a continuous Republican principle to attack higher ed starting when Republicans took charge of the legislature in North Carolina. I do not see it that way. If they wanted to attack higher ed, they would have cut our funding. But what they did is steadily increased our funding. I think conservatives who look at the academy and don't see themselves reflected much in the faculty, and I think the statistics bear that out, look for some political way to assert what they would call balance or something like that. This was never something I was aligned to in a certain way. I liked being a minority voice politically on campus, even though at times it was very uncomfortable. And I did not have connections in Raleigh, believe it or not, when I became provost. That's not how it happened. We can talk about how it happened. But you're asking about responsibilities, and let me frame it this way. The thing that I did first when I became provost is urged the trustees to adopt the Calvin principles, and they did. And then I urged the faculty to adopt the Calvin principles, and we didn't get there in the faculty council per se. They had adopted the Chicago principles already when I was provost, before I was provost. But we got a kind of institutional neutrality from the system level. And I think that's the anchor. That's really the anchor in which you know how to be a responsible administrator. And that works both ways across the political divide. And it's really to everyone's advantage. If you haven't read the Calvin report, you should read this very thoughtful report from this is in the civil rights era, where universities are having to decide, do we take positions on such fundamental matters as who has access to this institution? Do we, as faculty or administrators, engage in advocating, maybe even protesting and being arrested to get the federal government to step in and change the rules at the state level? So these were weighty questions. And what they said was, you know, the institution itself is not the instrument of dissent. And the administrator is not the instrument of dissent. That right, that privilege belongs to the faculty as individuals and collectively. And those voices will be best heard if you keep out of the way. Because the minute as provost, if I were to take a public position, I tried not to take public positions on political matters. People guessed what my views were, but I never articulate them. Because someone who disagrees now is not only expressing dissent against remote people in Raleigh or in Washington, their boss's boss has weighed in on the other side, and that has a chilling effect. And so it had been the practice of many administrators, especially when something would happen in the public news and they were asked to make a comment, to comment on matters of the day, political matters, social matters, from a perspective. Your introduction was very much from, I will say, a leftist perspective. And if we speak that way as administrators, we are making it harder for people who disagree to speak up, because whatever you may think about academic freedom, your tenure, there's fear when you speak out against the man or against whoever it is that has your paycheck in their care. There's always a chance you'll police yourself because you know you're going up against them. So I think the responsibility now with the DEI stuff, clearly the federal government, when you take federal money, you put yourself in a position to be whipped around by the federal government, right? This is the blessing and the curse of federal money. And it's been true that federal money has pursued projects that I'll call leftist projects, and federal money has pursued projects that you might think are more on the right. But when you take the money, you're gonna live with some amount of trouble. And so two examples. In the DEI space, we got 3 or 4 different regulations and a very threatening letter from the Office of Civil Rights about what we were doing on DEI. Mostly it's about the practice of the institution. Are we hiring with preferences? Are we doing affirmative action above and beyond what's required for all federal employers? But then it started to touch the curriculum. You're not going to say this in your class. You're not going to teach this in your class. That is not what the policies say. To somehow bully us as administrators into enforcing what is a hiring policy in the discussions in a classroom, completely inappropriate. So I saw my role as provost, and I think Lee and the new provost should see, and the interim provost should see this as their role, to push back whenever we're told the speech of a professor in the classroom about affirmative action is somehow regulated by policy. That is not how it works. Our hiring practices, absolutely, we have to follow federal law, but when you speak in the classroom, very different. When we bumped into the Calvin report, I'll give you this second. This is kind of funny. You may remember the Dobbs decision dropped. This is in the summer of 22. I had been provost for a few months. I happened to be on my way to the Galapagos Islands. I think I was somewhere in Ecuador, or I can't even remember when we heard this decision had dropped. I was with Kevin Guskowitz, and the question came, are we going to make a statement? Are we going to say something about the Dobbs decision? The Dobbs decision undid part of the framework of Roe versus Wade and returned some questions of when someone may have access to an abortion back to the states or to the people. And there was a thought we should say something. I said, that's not institutional neutrality. If we give an opinion on that, we make it harder for people who may be pro-life and agree with the Dobbs decision to speak out. And we've put ourselves into the conversation in a way that's inappropriate. So there was some debate about it, and I thought I do have a way to settle this. So when I was in graduate school, I was part of the campus pro-life movement. I helped organize rallies like many of our students here, including rallies with up to 50,000 people in them. So I said, I have a proposal. If you're going to make a statement, I'll agree to that. Let the provost write it. Then there was no further discussion about whether we were going to have. We did not make a statement. Something went out on Twitter from one of the offices. It was seen by many, and I had it pulled because it wasn't a matter of do we have free speech on Twitter as administrators. It was as administrators, we should not be taking a position on something that is a matter of debate and that is a matter of strenuous debate and strong feelings. So I think that's the responsibility, to stay out of the way as an institution and to protect the faculty in the classroom and obviously the students. To be able to hold their opinions, express their opinions, and to advocate for things that are different from the federal policy and law that we've just seen change. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments. I'm mindful of time.
Yeah, sorry. I'll try to answer more briefly.
No.
I think we've done the framing now.
Yeah. I appreciate that response, and I appreciate that clear call to action from to our current administration that there is a real obligation, both institutionally and morally, to reaffirm protections in and outside the classroom for faculty, and that attacks from whatever right-wing legal movement do really represent a threat to the university and its continued function and its continued academic mission.
Well, we should call it what it is. It's bullying.
Sure.
I felt bullied by some of the things that came to my desk, and I don't think you run a country as fine and as sophisticated as this by bullying universities. It's it trivializes.
Well, that's perhaps
trivializes what we do.
Sure. Perhaps a good transition if we're talking about lofty aspirational ambitions and being reduced to bullying. I want to ask about the School of Civic Life and Leadership. I know, given the content of the lawsuit, given an ongoing investigation about the School of Civic Life and Leadership, we're not going to be able to discuss the current operations of the school in too much detail. But I want to ask about the origins of the school, because I think the political movement, the way I understand it, the way TransparUNCy understands the origins of the school, are connected to a lot of these themes of attacks on faculty governance, on institutional integrity, on the politicization of the university. It's no secret that you played a central role in the development of the School of Civic Life and Leadership and its antecedent in the program for public discourse, including bringing the prolific conservative academic Robbie George to the UNC campus in order to speak with the Board of Governors and help develop the sort of institutional framework for the School of Civic Life and Leadership. Later, that was several years ago, and then in the spring of 2023, in a highly unprecedented move, the Board of Trustees announced the creation of the school. Many faculty in this room will know that they found out about it at the same time as the general public did on a Fox and Friends segment titled Waking Up to Wokeness, where trustee Marty Kotis declared that he was ending the persecution of conservative students on campus with the new School of Civic Life and Leadership. So my question for you is, given the highly ideological origins of the school, very explicitly stated by its proponents and by its developers, including yourself, and the violations of faculty governance, traditional norms of faculty governance in the creation of the school, is the crisis we're seeing in the School of Civic Life and Leadership right now not inevitable? Was it not built into the DNA of the school, given its highly unusual and inappropriate creation?
Well, I'm gonna push back on your framing again. What happened is two members of the Board of Governors in about 2017 or 18 decided they wanted a conservative school, and they pulled Carol Folt and Margaret Spellings into a little trip up to Princeton to talk to Robbie George about how we would do such a thing. Well, the Madison program that Robbie George runs is not a school. It's a program. It's not really a curricular part of Princeton University. And it's very centered on sort of a set of politics that are unique to the group of people who are in it. I found out about the trip because a friend of mine, Will Happer, a physics grad from the 60s, said, "Why are your administrators up here at Princeton?" And then I sent an email, which everyone has seen because it went out in the public. There are some things that didn't go out into the public, and I've been trying really hard. I had a practice. I can change now. When I was provost, not to leak anything to the media. Of course, the media requests things, and they get sent through legal, and they get redacted. But I wrote a long analysis of why we couldn't do a Madison program here and gave it to Dean Guskowitz. And I thought I said what we could do. And what we could do, a group of faculty that I collected together wanted to do the program for public discourse. And it wasn't that we invited just Robbie George to come. We had Robbie George and Cornel West. And we had both of them on a panel or a group of advisors for how you would set something up that was about discourse. And all of the faculty I talked to who were more conservative leaning explicitly said they did not want a conservative program. And when it came time to make the school, and by the way, the trustees have no authority to make a school. The legislature does. The legislature made the university. And the legislature can make a law saying there has to be a school, and they more or less did that in a budget bill. And they have another budget bill to refine the school that they're trying to make. So to me, the resolution of the trustees, which I didn't know was coming when they did it, I knew they were doing something, I didn't know they were going to do that, was without effect. And really what it said was hasten the construction of this school. So the team of people who had done the program for public discourse came together to try to start a new school. it had been discussed for many years. Numerous proposals had been put before the faculty. The faculty had seen this. There were members of the faculty who called even the program for public discourse retrograde because it talked about the Constitution, it talked about great books, it talked about Western civilization, and these things were anathema to some faculty. And so there was a group of faculty who strongly opposed the group of faculty trying to do this. I think if we could have gotten through that conversation and made something authentic at that moment, we would have had a much better outcome. But what happened is because it kept getting stopped through fear of the dissenting faculty and it kept getting stalled, it required at some point an act of the trustees and the provost to make something happen. So the story is a lot more complicated than you put it. And there were no faculty I talked to, and certainly not me, in favor of a quote unquote conservative school. A school open to all ideas and having debate between conservatives and liberals, yes. Does that mean you need conservative voices? Yes. Did we have them? I thought we did on campus. It isn't that there were no conservatives on campus. So I think I don't want to talk about what happened after that because I've been asked not to talk about matters that are under investigation now.
Yeah, I want to push back on a couple of things that you said. One, I would say, as you noted, that email that you sent Dr. Robbie George is a matter of public record, and you did explicitly state interest in the creation of a conservative school, explicitly phrased in those words.
Not what I said. If you read the email carefully, what I said was, I understand there is interest by our administration, that was not me, in a conservative school.
Right. So
I did not say I was interested in a conservative school. I was getting ahead of it because I thought we could do something.
Sure. To facilitate the connection in service of
email. And then I will give you, Toby, and you can put it out, the email I wrote to Kevin about why we could not have a Madison program here. It was very explicit about what Madison was doing and why it wouldn't work at a publicly funded university. Can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I would be excited to read that. I want to discuss then the role of the trustees in this, and as you described that deadlock between different groups of faculty, it seems to me the intervention by the state legislature and by the trustees, both highly politicized bodies, obviously state legislature explicitly political in nature, but the trustees and board of governors after the last 15 years have become increasingly activist, ideological, politicized. I don't see the trustees' intervention to hasten the creation of the school, to impose it over dissenting faculty as a necessary intervention. I see that as actually a pretty profound violation of norms of principles of faculty governance that is sort of usurping the rightful role of faculty as designers of the pedagogical function of university. And given Trustee Marty Kotis's statements, I know you won't necessarily speak to this, but again, the school was announced on a Fox News segment called Waking Up to Wokeness. The particular framing of the school was as explicitly political as you can get, regardless of the sort of humanistic academic aspirations of the school, in your mind, being about discourse, being about fostering intellectual diversity. The powers behind the creation of the school undoubtedly had different interests in it, right? The state legislature and the board of trustees undoubtedly had a far more ideological and political goal for the creation of the school. And I think ignoring that is naive at best and complicit at worst.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. And I don't want to say more on the time from that resolution forward. I saw, as did several people, the eventual act of a conservative legislature as inevitable. And the idea was, if the faculty can make something that makes sense and do it our way, that is better than having it done by legislative decree. When the trustees began to act, it became, for me, a wrestling match to keep it something that the faculty could own and do in the way that we had discussed in the early days. I won't say more about what happened after that, but we're not in disagreement that the wrong way to make a school is by legislative fiat with people who don't understand academia calling the shots. What I was hoping to do as provost is make sure that the school was something our faculty on the right and the left could be proud of.
Yeah, I appreciate that point of
And
agreement.
it was absolutely a conflict of who has authority.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes, and I'm glad that we can lay out those explicit political dynamics from the state legislature and from the Board of Trustees. I think it's very important for everyone to recognize truly how unprecedented that politicization is and how much of a threat it poses to the academic mission of the university. I want to turn to another issue of free speech that is particularly close to TransparUNCy's heart, and I know applies directly to a number of our members in the audience today. I want to turn to speech as it pertains to students' right to protest. As I mentioned previously in my preamble, the Trump administration is using a moral panic around anti-Semitism on university campuses as an excuse to cut funding and purge its ideological opponents. But again, accusations of anti-Semitism have been used to demonize pro-Palestinian student protesters since the beginning of Israel's now two-year genocidal war in Gaza, initially starting under the Biden administration. Notably, in the spring of 2024, the Provost Clemens administration on this campus used accusations of anti-Semitism against students protesting at the Gaza Solidarity Encampment to justify a highly militarized police response against peaceful protesters. After the fact, I would also like to point out in a particularly cynical official communications from your office and from Chancellor Roberts, you included photos of the encampment after it had been destroyed by police in an effort to portray student protesters as out of control and a threat to campus safety. Again, the ongoing federal overreach and attacks on higher education from the federal government is being justified using similar rhetoric to what your administration deployed. So I would ask, how do current and future university administrators ensure students' constitutionally protected rights to freedom of speech and freedom of assembly so that we don't implicitly or explicitly enable the actions of the Trump administration by using that rhetoric and that moral justification?
Yeah, once again, Toby, interesting framing. Let me say a little bit from my point of view. First of all, I was a student protester, and I knew what the rules were, and I knew if I wanted to get arrested, I could do it. Sometimes getting arrested is the best way to make a statement. But if no one enforces the rules and no one gets arrested, you're actually taking away that ability too. We did not have clear rules. I will say, as I found the rules on what's allowed and what's not allowed, there were policies that were facilities policies. There were policies that were about student conduct. They were in 5 different places. And so I think where I will fault the administration, and that's me, because even though I didn't make the rules, I could have tried to assemble them quickly into something that made sense and giving guidance. It was very hard for students to understand what is legitimate protest and what is not. We stayed in communication with the students through student affairs for a long time leading up to what became the arrests. They knew pitching permanent tents in a space that belongs to everyone was against the rules. And you'll remember they carried them around, and I thought it was a fun protest for, to make the point that we can't pitch our tents, so we're just going to have some moving tents. I thought that was effective, and I thought it made a very good point. But when they planted them in the ground, we got word on a Friday that they were no longer talking, that they were there and they were going to disobey the rules. They knew they were disobeying the rules. We knew they were disobeying the rules, and they had broken off communications with South Building. So we met over the weekend and made the plan to get rid of the tents. And if that meant arresting, they were told to disperse. When people didn't disperse, it's very difficult to arrest hundreds of people. You need a fairly large police force to do that. And I think in this case, I wasn't in charge of figuring that out. That was campus safety and security and the police force. Getting together the folks who were going to pick up the tents and give that space back to the commons. It required a lot of people.
Yeah, Dr. Clemens, I understand that. I'm not disputing the legitimacy of enforcing campus rules. And as you point out, getting arrested is often a crucial part of civil disobedience. I more want you to answer the parts of the question around the rhetoric and justification and the politicization of those arrests and of the repression of student protest. It's one thing to say students are violating these particular campus rules with regards to unauthorized structures on campus. It's another thing to say they're violent, they're anti-Semites, they pose a threat to student safety. None of those things were true. None of those things were true.
Well,
And
I don't remember calling anyone an anti-Semite.
the inclusion of accusations of anti-Semitism from student protesters was implicitly supporting a moral panic that conflated legitimate criticism of the genocide in Gaza with anti-Semitism. I'd like to say, as a Jew, I find the weaponization of anti-Semitism by the federal government, by your administration, to be reprehensible. There's nothing about standing in solidarity with victims of a genocide that is anti-Semitic. It is one thing to bring in, a police force. I think we can dispute the necessity of how militarized it was. Chapel Hill felt like a war zone, frankly, for a few days with armored tanks rolling down the street. But even if we allow for the legitimacy of a police response to continued civil disobedience, it is an entirely different question about how the administration politicizes that response. When Chancellor Roberts, the following day, marched out of South Building, flanked by what I can only describe as a battalion of police officers en route to protect the flag, that was an incredibly powerful piece of political theater that essentially confirmed his chancellorship. The main audience for that was the Trump administration, the federal government, and I guess the Biden administration at the time, but certainly the state government, and Republican politicians who controlled his job security. I think it's worth reflecting now that we've seen accusations of anti-Semitism, like I said, being used to justify really the destruction of the modern research university as we know it, right? With hundreds of millions, billions of dollars being cut in research grants and various kinds of legal coercion from the federal government, using that same rhetoric, using the rhetoric of anti-Semitism, of fighting anti-Semitism. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to reflect on what role we played in enabling that moral panic and creating that permission structure for that rhetoric to be used the way that it's being weaponized today.
Well, I think you're an excellent rhetorician yourself. I don't want to try to answer for anything that Lee Roberts did. I was not in the building when those decisions were made. I was actually having meetings all over campus. I think I was announcing an interim dean to the School of Education when that actually happened. So what did I do? And what were my thoughts during all of this? Well, we have to go back to several months before when students invaded the rotunda and began pounding on the walls of South Building. It was my desire to have people arrested on that day. There was a moment where I thought I was actually in charge of that decision. I was standing there with the police chief, and he's asking me what to do. But the chief of staff came in and let me know that the chancellor had the ball, and so I didn't wind up doing anything. In terms of the actual day of those arrests, I agreed with the decision that we had to clear the encampment. The police make the decisions in collaboration with our own security on how to do that. So there was not any rhetorical device, but I was angry, I will tell you. I was angry when they disrupted our operations. I had to go, we were having a meeting of my student advisory group in the afternoon that the rotunda was taken over. There were Jewish students on that advisory committee who told me they would not come into South Building. And so I wound up meeting over in Phillips Hall back in physics. So it absolutely disrupted the operations of the university, and that's against the rules. I respect that people had wanted to give voice to their own viewpoints. I'm not going to weigh in on Israel-Palestine. That is a bigger subject than I want to get into. But I'm not ashamed of any decision that I took or anything that I did. Indeed, if anyone should be offended here, and you can claim some offense because of the way this was framed. I was spit on. I was yelled at. We never made a big deal about it, but my car was attacked. Things were thrown at it. Someone tried to break into it while I was driving. They destroyed part of the car. I was paid restitution by 3 students. We didn't make, this is not, if I wanted to frame something in the media, right? If what I wanted to do was to pretend to be some kind of victim as provost, that easily could have been done. As it was, I saw people, engaged. I did not feel I did not feel my safety was compromised, even though I was surrounded by about 100 students. They were throwing water balls. If you've seen my car, they're writing on the rover, but the paint, you know, the paint has been gone since 1999. I actually brush painted the hood one time, and so they're not harming. They weren't harming anything. I felt it was a legitimate protest, but it was a little threatening, you know, to have students do that. So there's a lot more to the story. I mean, you're telling it from a political point of view as something that was done as a particular piece of rhetoric. And for all I know, that may be true, and that may have been Lee's intentions. I understood he just wanted to put the flag back up, and he thought he needed an escort. But I didn't engage in any of that. I was trying to keep the academics on the rails. In fact, I was in a hearing that morning in my office with the blinds drawn because I was trying to take care of a faculty matter.
Well, Dr. Clemens, I'm glad that you were not hurt that day. A number of people in this room can't say the same for themselves, including myself. Yeah, I think it's important to recognize.
Were you there with the car?
I was not there with the.
Which day were you hurt?
I was hurt when a highly militarized group of police officers came and started pepper spraying myself and all of my friends. And
did you get advice to disperse?
I think the level of police violence.
Did you get advice to disperse?
Students were unarmed.
Were you told police were coming to disperse?
Does that
just answer the question?
Does that justify?
Now, I've been very frank and honest, and everybody wants you to be authentic here. And I want authentically you to tell me without dodging, because now, I mean, you accuse Lee Roberts of being political. Answer the question. Did you get the word to disperse that police were coming?
Yes, of course.
You made the choice, Toby. I'm not.
That's an absolute false binary.
No,
hold on. I can respond,
but I can't push.
No, Dr. Clemens, I appreciate the pushback. I can absolutely answer for myself. I did receive an order to disperse, absolutely, as did all of the other students. That does not mean that the level of violence police then decided to use was justified. There are more than two options. The level of violence was excessive and brutal and was political in nature, right? The optics of what that looks like for the chancellor to walk out of South Building with armed police officers facing unarmed students and to decide to deploy that level of force, that is absolutely political. That sends a political signal to the Republicans in Raleigh. That sends a political signal to students and members of our campus community. That was a choice. He was not compelled to do that. Just because students are not dispersing at the initial order does not mean that level of violence is justified. And the decision to use that level of violence and brutality has huge political implications, the consequences of which we are still living out today under this federal government that is using that same rhetoric to justify the destruction of the modern research university as we know it.
Well, so let me say, I'm not an expert on police action. I was not present when all of the decisions were taken, and I don't know some of the discussions that occurred. From what I saw, and the attempt to use campus security where possible, people were trying to solve a problem with the least force possible. And you know, I could be way off. There may have been another way to do it. I'm not an expert in how police have to manage something like that. I did not see anyone there. I can tell you there were some people who were afraid. And it's when people have to put hands on others, the police are very resistant to having to put hands on others. They do not want to do that. They do. I'm telling you what I heard and saw. They do not want to do that. Now it's part of their job and they have to do it. They will do it. But if you were in South Building, there were about 12 police officers, because for a moment a crowd broke through the door, and they pushed the crowd back out. And the folks who were in South Building, you know, I have their doors that lock. I wasn't worried, but the people who were worried about this. So I think I can't adjudicate what level of police action is required. I did not hear or see anything that meets the description of what you're saying. It may look that way to you, and I don't want to disagree with you about how it looks and how it may be read by people. But I was there for some of the conversations with the police who were very worried about how to do this and how to do it effectively in the way that caused the least harm. I did not see some jackbooted, authoritarian, eager people going out to arrest students. It was done, if anything, reluctantly.
If that's reluctance,
By
I
the
don't
police.
want to see what they look like when they're into
I'm
it.
trying to speak on behalf of our police force. Of course, I wasn't out there encountering them, so I don't know what it was like on the ground.
Sure. I know you were not there in person. I'm not going to make you answer explicitly for their actions. I want to more reaffirm this political reality that we're living through, right? That the weaponization of anti-Semitism, the accusation that student protesters in support of Palestinian human rights are the Trump administration uses the language of terrorism, right? The Trump administration is interested in portraying student solidarity movements as violent, as anarchic, as terroristic, as deserving of brutality. And I think it is incumbent upon all of us, especially those of us in positions of power, to reject that and condemn that and recognize the political impacts, the material impacts that our rhetoric and our actions have in perpetrating this right-wing overreach from the Trump administration.
Yeah, so let's get to a point of agreement here. I've already said it's inappropriate to bully academics around matters of policy and to try to stipulate what they say in the classroom. I do think, and I will agree with you, that some of the rhetoric we are hearing out of Washington and other places feels just like that same kind of bullying. It is an attempt to establish a political frame that marginalizes one point of view and highlights another. I mean, I think this is why we wanted a discourse program. This is why we wanted a program for public discourse. I think lowering the temperature is the responsibility of responsible administrators and responsible leaders in Washington. I do not see any desire to lower the temperature. And I think it's not healthy for the country. So we're in 100% agreement that in as much as we see people ramping up rhetoric on the right and trying to push into what I will say sacred norms of the academy and free speech and the First Amendment, we need to call for it to stop. And so I join you in that. I think we would all be well advised to lower the temperature, to take the rhetoric down a notch, to try to be authentic with one another about where we're truly coming from, to try to see past the polarization of society. Everyone in here is a human being. The founders of this nation, unlike my daughter's textbook, Why Social Justice Matters, they believed rights were intrinsic and innate and given by the God of this universe to each person, that they're inviolable, that they're sacred, and that the government protects those. The government doesn't dispense those. The government protects those rights you already have. And inasmuch as our government is out of its lane and is infringing upon First Amendment freedoms, is infringing upon rights to peaceably assemble, is infringing upon academic freedom, is infringing upon the freedom of the press, the freedom of religion, then that government is failing. That government is failing to live up to the standards of the nation and the Bill of Rights, which are enshrined in the Constitution and have not been, last I saw, withdrawn from the people. And so this belongs to us, the people, not to the federal government. Federalism means the federal government does as little as possible. That's how I understood the Constitution, right? That the federal government is there only for those things that cannot be done locally. And while I was provost, I used the language of Catholic social justice teaching from the last Pope Leo. And I really think Rerum Novarum, everybody go read Rerum Novarum. It's talking about how one enacts solidarity. And look, I do feel solidarity with students. And I'm sorry for anybody who got hurt by anything I participated in it was never my intention for anyone to be hurt. And I was not the final decision maker, but I did acquiesce to that decision. I thought it was the right thing to do. So inasmuch as my acquiescence caused you harm or pain, I am sorry. That is never what I would intend. I feel great solidarity for students. Subsidiarity. Let decisions happen at the lowest possible level where people know what they're doing. That means departments do their hiring and run their business. Deans, when necessary, govern over the departments, and the provost is only there for things that the provost absolutely has to do. Likewise, the President of the United States, I thought they were very delimited powers, and now by executive decree, you could bully everyone. I don't believe in an expansive federal government. I don't believe in expansive powers of the chief executive, and I believe in that at the university level. I was in every faculty council meeting saying shared governance, solidarity, subsidiarity. Oh, and by the way, preferential option for the poor. If we're not thinking about people who have less than what we have, then we're not doing it right. So these are principles I try to live by. They come into tension when you're trying to be an administrator. There were things that I had to grapple with every day and decisions I had to make. I hope I got most of them right. I'm sure I did not get all of them right. And so I don't think we're in fundamental disagreement about the principles on which this nation should be run, the principles of shared governance that matter to the university, and what it is we're trying to accomplish, which is the flourishing of each of us, each of our students, and the recognition of their full human potential. So anything that we have done, that I have done, or that Lee has done, that goes against that, feel free to call us out. I mean, you've called me out, and I'm happy to say, in as much as I participated in things that hurt people, I'm sincerely sorry. I'm not just apologetic. I feel remorse, and I reflect on things that I feel remorse about that you don't even know about, that I'm not going to get into here. But look, none of us is perfect, and I think authentic conversation requires me to say I made a lot of mistakes, and I tried really hard to keep some things on the rails, and I failed.
Dr. Clemens, I appreciate you saying all of that. I think that remorse and apology and recognition of our, of humility is genuinely meaningful for myself to hear, and I know a number of other people in the room. And I agree, in the interests of taking down the temperature, conversations like this are important and valuable in the spirit of First Amendment Day, to bring it back. So I do genuinely appreciate you joining us and engaging in conversation about this. I think we were allotted half an hour originally, and we're now almost at 50 minutes. I want to check in with the people who are running. We got to wrap it up. Okay. My sincere apologies to people who had questions. It was my intention to have more time for a Q&A.
You can't take one.
Can we? What are we feeling?
Let's get a student question.
You also spoke about how UNC is at the goal of your direct quote conservative legislature in both the state and federal government, which is signaling a degree of federal overreach. How can the university balance both of these realities while still protecting what would be considered quote speech by the legislature?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard. The position that a university administrator is in is worrying about funding from a legislature when the things happening on campus are not to their liking. And everyone is just going to have to be adults. And I think most of the folks in the legislature are adults. They understand that the rules by which a university is run are going to lead to political diversity in ways that make them uncomfortable. And they need to just learn to be uncomfortable with that. Likewise, over here at the university, when we get a federal ruling that the kind of affirmative action we were doing, which was effectively illegal race preferences, has got to stop, we're going to have to get some comfort around following those laws, which are not subject to debate when they're enacted. But they need to be clear and not 5 different policies and regulations with vague and threatening memos on the side. I mean, that was what I found so frustrating. I didn't know how to interpret what was coming. And so I pushed back where I thought lines were crossed, which is as soon as someone says, I can't say diversity in the classroom, I'm like, this is ridiculous. We don't have a university if you can't say diversity in the classroom. Yeah. Well, let's just think about who actually pays for the university. We run on the tuition of students and the taxpayers. 82% in state, those are the parents of the students and the students themselves who pay those taxes. That is a collective pot of money that pays for all of this. The legislature is in the way when they say, we're going to dispense this money or make these rules according to our preferences. They need to represent the broad will of the people of this state. And this is a very, I think, balanced. I think the state is balanced politically. And if we will just listen to the students, we'll probably do better than if we sort of heed everything that comes down as a bullying memo and try to comply because we're in fear of losing our funding. Because in fact, you fund it, and everybody else is just in the way. So you should have the right to demand something that comports with your expectations for a university education.
Can I ask, is this room being used like for another event right after this?
Yeah, in
we
like
gotta go.
10 minutes, we're like turning it over. You know what I mean? To a different thing. But that's what I'm saying. If there's continue the conversation as we turn it over, one-on-one after this.
All right.
So.
Again, I apologize that there was not more room for public Q&A. Again, in the spirit of open and spirited discourse, I'm sure there's a lot of appetite to continue to talk through these questions. So stay and continue to discuss. Thank you, everyone, for coming today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Clemens, for coming today and agreeing to talk with us. Thanks, everyone.